Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. One of the less discussed developments in the Finance Bill 2017 is the way the Narendra Modi government has effectively made corporate funding of political parties more opaque, contrary to its promise of bringing in more transparency. The Finance Bill has made two important changes in this regard. First, it has scrapped a ceiling that earlier restricted a corporate entity from donating more than 7.5% of its average net profit in the 3 immediate preceding fiscal years to a political party. Second, it has proposed to cancel an existing rule that requires corporate entities to disclose in the profit and loss account the name of the political party to which the funding is made. The company only needs to make a mention of the amount contributed under this category. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the changes in rules for political funding. Joining me on the program today are A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard, Vipul Mudgal, Director of Common Cause, and we'll also be joined by Chakshu, Head of Outreach, PRS Legislative Research, and S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner. Firstly, Mr. Bhattacharya, I'd like to start with you, of course. What do you make of these changes? I mean, whether really required, were you surprised by the changes? The government has been talking about transparency all along, but here comes a move which doesn't look very transparent.
Yeah, I mean, what has happened is that in the budget, what was proposed was electoral bonds. Now, electoral bonds brought in the concept of anonymity, that the bonds may be subscribed to by somebody and his identity or the company's identity would not be disclosed to anybody. And I think there's the same, the spirit of anonymity has now been extended to the corporate sphere, where a company making a donation to a political party, that the amount would be known, but which party it has gone to will not be disclosed. Now there are questions about whether the anonymity principle needed to be extended from electoral bonds to corporate donations through checks as well. But the larger question to my mind, as somebody who has been in the field of financial journalism for many years, is the change in the company's law which removes the ceiling of 7.5% of the net profit over a period of average of previous 3 years. Now this to my mind raises a lot of shareholder issues in a sense that the 7.5% cap was kept in view of a company's, to keep in check a company's excessive desire to please the political establishment or the political party which it wants to do a good turn to. Now I think this removing the cap will be an anti-shareholder step, because the ordinary shareholder would certainly feel that what is his recourse to some sort of a redressal if an excessive amount from the profit which would have otherwise been shared among the shareholders has gone to a certain specific political party. So I think the principle of anonymity which was restricted to the idea of electoral bonds, been extended to corporate funding, and second is shareholder interest, I think has been compromised. So I would say these are the two not very desirable outcomes of the latest round of proposals that have been put forward.
Indeed. Vipul Mudgal, this leaves the scope really wide open as far as corporate lobbying is concerned, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. You see, if you keep it simple, try to understand how political corruption happens. In two ways. One, the political party or those in power can have a rent-seeking kind of attitude and can tell you that, okay, you want to do business with us, give us so much, okay, or give me so much or whatever. So that's one way of extorting money or forcing people to pay up. The other is, which people can trace, is to see the quid pro quo, that you've given me a contract worth 4,000 crores and I have given you 400 crores. So you can see quid pro quo there. Now if there is anonymity, the funders are not obliged to disclose who they have funded. and those who have received the funds are not obliged to disclose who have given them the money, then you cannot trace either of the two things. So I think it's a very bad idea. The second thing is the cap of 2,000 rupees means absolutely nothing. It's just like saying that, you know, earlier if somebody were to ask you that you've got this 10 crore rupees, where have you got it from? You will say that n number of people gave it to me by way of cash, 20,000 rupees. Today you will give a number, n into 10 people have given it to me. So it makes absolutely no difference. So I think I would go a step forward and I would say that it's either an extremely naive move on part of the finance minister or extremely mischievous. I think if we see that electoral funding is the fountainhead of all corruption in India, then this will make things more opaque, this will work against transparency, and it will make the political party bosses more powerful. And I think in every way this is a retrograde and a regressive step.
A retrograde step is what you're calling it, of course. We're joined by Mr. S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner, on the program as well. Mr. Qureshi, your views on, you know, the political funding and the new rules, really, what do you think of them?
Well, you know, the finance minister's speech, the opening remark was that for the last 70 years there has not been any transparency of political funding, and without which a free and fair election is not possible. And his intent was excellent and it raised great hopes. But later on he went on to contradict it by saying that the donors do not want transparency, they want secrecy. Because they say that if they give to one political party, they are harassed by the other political party, which I don't think is very true. For one, that they all these guys are smart and they fund all the parties. Whosoever may come to power has been funded by them. And secondly, political parties are not so naive that they will start hounding them only for having donated money to the other one. Probably in the name of the secrecy, what they are afraid of is that their quid pro quo will get known. If they give money to the government and in return they get some licenses, some contracts and some favors which will get known to the people, that is what they want to protect. So I think that's not a good argument, and therefore in any case the original intent of the finance minister is totally negated by the need for secrecy of the donor. So therefore it has to be dealt with. And the other thing which has happened is about the electoral bonds. Electoral bonds actually are worse than what was happening earlier. Earlier, every donation of more than 20,000 was declared to the election commission. Now nobody will know, only it will be transferred like cash. So that has to be dealt with. One hope is that I heard the Rajya Sabha debate and finance minister's response in Rajya Sabha a couple of days ago, when he said that the scheme for electoral bond is still being discussed, details are still being worked out, and he invited suggestions from everybody. I think that is a last opportunity for everybody to express their concern, and I hope that the finance minister will address them.
So is that from everybody or is that from only political parties? I mean, the suggestions have been invited.
Mr. Qureshi, our guest Vipul Mudgal is asking you if the suggestions are going to be invited only from political parties or from everyone, even the common man.
I don't know. I suppose the common man also in the media, because he sounded like an open invitation for people to make suggestions. He said we are very open because the whole idea is to introduce transparency of political funding. In fact, he says, look, if you don't want it and if you are happy with the cash culture, I'm okay to go back to that. So my impression was that he gave an open challenge to everybody to come out with suggestions and give opinions.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Chakshu Roy, Head of Outreach, PRS Legislative, also joins us on the debate right now. Chakshu Roy, you know, as far as political funding is concerned, what's changed now from the previous set of rules that we had?
I think Vipul, laid down the ground beautifully as to what has changed. One is, that limit of 20,000 rupees has been shifted upwards towards 2,000 rupees. And also with the introduction of the electoral bonds. I have two comments to make. One is that, whenever we have experimented with, putting limits on things in the name of, curbing political corruption, we've not always had the desired results. So, for example, over the years, we have imposed limits on election expenditure. And those limits, while on paper are there, every time we hear, reports in the media that the money spent in election is way beyond the limits that is there. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is, when it comes to electoral bonds, I'm not too sure if there is complete clarity on, how these bonds will be rolled out. And as the finance minister rightly pointed, and as Qureshi sahab rightly pointed out, that, rules and regulations will be framed, and probably the finance minister is inviting, comments on it. I just want to supplement, what has already been said with this. I think rules and regulations, and the intent of the law is very good, or might be either in the right direction or the wrong direction. But how does it get operationalized on the ground will be even more key, because sometimes what happens is the intent is one, and by the time it starts getting implemented, the intent gets completely changed. Right? So the 20,000 rule was also circumvented. So is there a guarantee that the 2,000 rule, as Vipulji was pointed out, will be circumvented or will not be circumvented? I was witnessing a debate in the Rajya Sabha today on the finance bill, where it was mentioned that the reason for saying the 2,000 rupee limit is there is so that people on the ground, can contribute, and normal political activity on the ground can also happen. So that's an argument for that. But the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. So let us see as to how political parties will work with these kind of rules, and how the corporates, who currently had a 7.5% limit under the Companies Act, which has now been removed, and how will the corporates respond? Will they be donating a lot more or a lot less? As Qureshi sahab pointed out, since there will be no quid pro quo, firmly attributed, will that mean that, as a corporate entity, will I give to everybody, or will I only give to a select few? Because anonymity, nobody will know as to who I'm giving it to.
Sure, fair enough. I'm going to take the point of the electoral bonds forward with Mr. Bhattacharya. Mr. Bhattacharya, after the finance minister's budget speech about 2 months ago, we had a discussion here about electoral bonds, and we were clueless then. Are we none the wiser today, or do we know more about the electoral bonds?
No fresh detail has come out so far. What we know is that these bonds will have a very short life, relatively short life, of maybe about 4 weeks to 6 weeks, by which time these bonds will have to be in cash. Obviously, these bonds will have no coupon rate or no interest rate on those bonds, so that nobody can actually have the incentive of keeping them with them. So I don't think, to answer your question, we don't have many details that are necessary before the idea of the electoral bond is understood in the entirety. Just one point I would like to add here, that electoral bonds arose out of the government desire to eliminate cash donations in the sphere of political funding. So the idea was that a lot of people have cash. Now they cannot give more cash because 2,000 limit has been brought down. So they can go and buy those bonds, and those bonds can be used by the political parties and encash them, and the money becomes into the political parties' coffer. Now, what has happened now is a little different, is that you have brought in the element of anonymity, where the people, the companies who are going to give that money will obviously will give it in check, but even that money will go without its source being known, who is given to whom. So I don't see a logical flow of thinking on electoral funding by the government from what was originally said in the budget speech and what has been done now. On the budget day, the idea was because 20,000 is becoming 2,000, accepting the Election Commission recommendation. So the idea was 20,000 cash cannot be given anymore, so up to 2,000 only, so some restriction. And in the electoral bond, you can do anything with the electoral bond. But here, you are now, what was completely in the open, transparent domain, you have introduced an element of anonymity, which will not allow analysts, observers, political commentators, and society at large to know that what has been the give and take between a political party and a corporate entity. And of course, the shareholder interest, to my mind, is even worse, because the shareholders, the earlier 7.5% cap runs contrary to the shareholder interest in any company.
Sure, fair enough. Talking about corporates and corporate lobbying, Vipul, it's not something new. There are several democracies around the world, and corporate lobbying is prevalent in almost all of them. But, what are some of the best practices that we could probably use here back in India, taking cue from probably a Canada or a United States?
I think in this case, we are better off not learning from anybody. We have a democracy for more than 70 years. We can teach the rest of the world how not to do things. So I think if we go, say for instance, you said Canada, maybe anonymity is big there. We don't want anonymity here because transparency is essential in Indian elections. We want to see, because the political parties have become so venal, and secondly, the political parties also lack internal democracy. So it is in effect the party of satraps who have gone more and more exalted and emboldened and become bigger and more powerful. We don't want more of it. So I think the best thing is that we learn, rather than from global best practices, is from our own mistakes and make a move. For instance, when demonetization happened, we were told, and it's probably one good part of it, that you can pay for your bhindi and bagan and your vegetables and for everything else, even 50 rupees in digital payment. Now, one thought at that time, maybe these political parties will also accept everything. Why even 500 rupees? I mean, you should encourage the common man, because you want the common man to pay for his vegetables through Paytm and stuff like that. Then why not encourage the common man to pay everything? You see, the question is that the digital money leaves a trail, and that trail can be kind of retraced. That is the most important part of it. And the other thing which must be understood is that, look, if you don't have clarity, the same digital payment can be used for obfuscation also. We have also seen the way money flies from one shore to another and to offshore companies. Very often black money is turned into white electronically also. So we want transparency, and there should be no confusion about that. Transparency in electoral funding is good for political parties also. In the end, I think it is good for the country, it's good for everybody.
And and the transparency of political parties should be extended to the principle of forcing political parties to file their returns on an annual basis. Right now, it's not happening. It is not being enforced. There are political parties whose accounts are not finalized for several years back.
So can I just add one thing to that? In fact, not just that. Like the conditional cash transfer happens in Bolsha, Familia, in various places. You can say that you will get the money only when you hold internal elections. You hold district level elections, and then your party can be entitled to political funding. You can do two things with one. Kill two birds with one stone.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Qureshi, let's talk about the way forward now. What needs to be done so as to ensure that, political funding is more transparent?
I think the most transparent thing will be even going beyond the debate that we are now engaged in. I would say that the setting up a national electoral fund where the corporates will donate upfront, no need for any secrecy, no need for anonymity we seem to be talking about, and then from the National Electoral Fund, The political parties will be funded according to their performance. For every vote, my calculation has been for every vote, if you give 100 rupees, you end up giving them 5,500 rupees after every election, which is what they are claiming to have collected in all 5 years, all of them put together. So therefore, instead of resorting to all devious and illegal means to collect their money, if it comes to them grace-free from the state government, from the national exchequer through the electoral fund, and 5,500 rupees, 5,500 crores is peanuts for honesty in the country, because the election corruption is the root cause of all corruption. When you spend crores in the election, you collect crores, and how you collect crores, it leads to crony capitalism and or favoritism. All that will disappear. Why are they not debating that solution? That's a very doable thing, and many countries have that system working.
Sure, fair enough. I'm short of time today on the program, so I'd like to get final closing comments from all my guests, beginning with you, Chakshu Roy. As far as political funding is concerned, do you see a silver lining somewhere down the line?
The silver lining will exist, only if, our legislators and our political parties, talk about course correction after these steps are implemented. Data currently suggests that even, in the current scheme of things, the amount of cash that goes to political parties is disproportionately higher than the amount of total check or traceable money that they receive. And if the finance minister's steps, when they are implemented, if that trend does not seem to reverse, then we need to really think about the fact as to whether these things need to be reversed. That's one. The second part that Qureshi Sahab was talking about was the fund. A number of countries, Germany is an example, which does state funding of elections, where the formula is vote share, equivalent to support from the state. In India, some measure of that happens through electoral trusts. I'm not fully aware of their working, but the way electoral trusts work in India is that they provide financial support to parties based on the number of votes or seats that are won in a particular election. So that's something that should be talked about a little more, because in the past we've talked about state funding of elections. The Prime Minister has talked about state funding of elections. So as to when those mechanisms start getting more play in the public discourse, only time will tell.
Indeed, fair enough. Mr. Bhattacharya, your closing remarks.
My only comment would be that the National Electoral Fund is a good idea, but my only word of caution there would be, how do you judge allocation of funds to new parties? The fund should not be against the interest of new parties which come into play, and it should not be a past performance based funding. In a sense, in a past performance based funding, there is a danger that we suffocate and snuff out the ideas of new parties coming into the frame and not getting funding. So that some way out has to be found out, so that new initiatives don't get a chance to come into the electoral firmament.
Sure, fair enough. Vipul Mudgal?
I think there should be open debate, as Bhattacharya said. There are problems with everything that you do. So it has to be thought through, open and good debate in the country. There are many other areas in which electoral malpractices take place. We know there is paid news, which has a funding aspect, and the big players are involved in that, big political parties are involved in that. There is trolling on social media, there is hate speech. Each one of these things have to be considered. It's not just money. And I think the time has come when we should sit together, get our best brains together and do something about it. Otherwise, our democracy will be undermined.
Fair enough. And Mr. Qureshi, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yes, I think the serious national debate is what is called for. And what Mr. Bhattacharya said, some reservation on my suggestion. I have only said that this should be accepted. Once accepted in principle, the details can be worked out. How to take care of the upcoming new parties. Although my one line response will be, Aam Aadmi Party, for instance, they invested first. In any venture, you invest first and then you expect return. Here, if you they just start giving money for contest election, every Tom, Dick and Harry would say, come, election is being supported, let us all go stand up. But details can be worked out. We have to accept the idea in principle. And one clarification, I am not supporting state funding of elections, but state funding of political parties. Because state funding of elections is very difficult to monitor. State funding of parties based on actual vote which they have received is very easy, because you can't fudge your vote. You get one vote, you get 100 rupees, as simple as that.
Sure, fair enough. Mr. Bhattacharya, do you want to respond to that?
I think it's a valid point that, if it is linked to the votes that you have earned, and if it is funding is not elections, but the funding is political parties, it is a very important distinction Professor Qureshi has made, and I think this should be kept in mind in any future debate over national funding of not elections, but funding of political parties.
Indeed. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests, S.Y. Qureshi, A.K. Bhattacharya, Vipul, Mudgal and Chakshu Roy. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. See you again next time.